What do you do when you say no to someone and suddenly you're the villain and you face guilt trips and the silent treatment or even outbursts of rage? The first thing you need to remember is that your boundaries are not the problem, but someone's reaction to those boundaries tells you everything you need to know about them and your relationship. As a clinical psychologist helping people to build healthy relationships after toxic ones, in this video I'm going to share the exact strategies that I use to empower people to maintain their dignity and their sanity in some of the most challenging relationships with parents, ex-partners, co-workers and friends. Let's start with a tough but liberating truth. Other people are entitled to feel what they feel. They can feel disappointed, hurt, frustrated, even angry when you decide to set a boundary. And you also get to feel what you feel and decide what your limits are. Now, with this truth in mind, think back to the last time someone had a negative reaction to you setting a boundary. How did you respond? Most of us will tend to do one of two things, and both of them tend to make the situation worse. The first is to get defensive of your boundary. You state it more strongly. You explain it, you justify it, you argue your case, maybe even set an ultimatum. The result? You go around in circles and the conflict escalates. The other person responds by defending their position, expressing their disappointment, their hurt, their anger even more strongly, which just makes you want to defend yourself even more. You're off to the races. Or you go for the placating response. You go quiet, you don't defend yourself. And sure, this diffuses the immediate conflict, but at great cost to you, and you get left feeling completely invisible in this relationship. But there is a third way, and it has the power to diffuse some ticking emotional bombs without requiring you to give up your feelings or your limits. The key isn't in fighting harder or in giving in. It's about engaging differently. It's called radical empathy. Now I can hear what you're thinking. Dr. Ruth, having empathy for toxic people is what got me into this mess in the first place, and now you're recommending more empathy? But it's not what you think. Radical empathy isn't about being kind. It's not about accommodating harmful behaviors. It's not about giving up your ground or becoming a doormat. It's just seeking to deeply understand the other person's perspective, their emotions, their intentions, their motivations, without sacrificing your own. And this has the power to transform not only the immediate conflict, but the entire relationship. I'm not promising that this will resolve every conflict or diffuse every difficult situation, much less transform every relationship. But as a therapist who works with diagnosed narcissists and those close to them, I think this is your best bet for the most constructive solution possible. But please don't worry if you're thinking this could never work for you, because I'm also going to cover what to do when, despite all your best efforts, the other person still doesn't respect your boundaries and they respond with gaslighting and guilt tripping or outsized anger. But if you are willing to give radical empathy a go, this is how you start. Get really interested and curious about the other person's perspective. How do they feel about your boundary? Listen to what they're saying, ask them how they're feeling, and listen out for their emotional reactions. Now, right now you might be thinking, but if I do that, is that suggesting that they're in the right or that I'm in the wrong and that I should give in? But radical empathy isn't about agreeing, and it's not about giving in. It's making space for them and how they feel. You can recognize that they're hurt or disappointed, frustrated or angry at your boundary without agreeing with them or compromising your position. However, by helping them to feel seen and heard, they're much less likely to go in the defensive or on the attack. And this can de-escalate the conflict. Instead of a fruitless argument which goes on until one of you, let's be realistic, most likely you, gives in, you open the way to more constructive dialogue where there's space for their feelings and for your feelings and your boundary. So what might this look like? You can express empathy for their situation and how they feel, which might sound something like, I understand you're really disappointed that I'm not going to spend the holidays with you this year. You can also empathize with how they're interpreting that situation. I understand that you think this means you're not important to me, and that must be very painful for you. And you can follow this up with a simple explanation of your perspective, which prompts them to have empathy for you, which might sound something like, I'm sure you can understand, it's a very long trip, and I've been under a lot of stress at work recently, so I really want to take this holiday season to rest. Now, I want to be clear, this needs to be a straightforward, direct, non-defensive, simple explanation of your position. You're not on trial, so you don't need to go into lengthy explanations or defend yourself or get bogged down in the minutiae and the details. And if you notice that they are fixating on the little details and picking over every little thing and arguing with you, ask them how they're really feeling rather than getting drawn into that kind of discussion. As you understand their perspective, you can also clearly state your intention. So you might say something like, the intention in not coming for the holidays isn't to reject you, and it's not because you're not important to me. It's because it's the best thing for me right now. This kind of clarification can create space for mutual understanding. They may still feel hurt, disappointed, and angry about your boundary, but it opens up at least some space for them to understand where you're coming from. By acknowledging their feelings, you alleviate them of the need to defend them, and that might create space for them to continue to have their feelings whilst also accepting your boundary. And in the same way, you continue to assert your boundary whilst accepting and acknowledging their feelings of hurt, disappointment, and anger. By communicating in this way, you're not just asserting your needs, you're also nurturing the ability to have conflict and difficult feelings in a relationship while still maintaining a deep emotional connection. This builds a strong foundation of trust where both people can feel seen and understood even when they have difficult emotions and disagreements with each other. And I hope that you can experience the transformative effects of this kind of empathy in at least some of your relationships. But we shouldn't pretend that this is always going to work. There will be relationships where, despite your best efforts, some people will still not accept your boundary. They'll continue to gaslight and guilt trip or have an angry outburst, whatever you do. And when this happens, you might find yourself questioning, well, what did I do wrong? Can I ever do anything right? However, these may not be the best questions to ask, and you need to understand that their response to you isn't necessarily a reflection on you or how you've communicated. It may say far more about them and the relationship. So ask yourself, what does this behavior say about how they see me? What does it say about our relationship? Is there any space for me and my needs in this relationship? And what does this relationship really mean to you? What do you hope to get from it? These questions can help you shift away from self-doubt towards a more constructive evaluation of the relationship's dynamics and your place within it. In these situations, you're faced with some very tough choices, and that's exactly why you need to ask these bigger questions about the relationship so you can make the wisest decisions moving forward. The reality is stark. If they don't respect your boundaries, you can't make them. You do have options, but none of them are ideal. In this situation, you're not picking the best option, you're picking the least worst, and you're having to decide, what can you live with? You could continue to engage with them. Argue your point, state your case, assert your boundaries, express yourself, listen to them, express yourself again, but that tends to lead to endless conflict and you feeling like you constantly have to defend yourself. It's exhausting. You could go ahead with your planned boundaries. You don't want to spend the holidays with them? Don't spend the holidays with them. Go home at the point you decide you want to go home. Leave the conversation at the point at which you decide to leave the conversation and accept the fallout. Their adverse reaction to your boundary doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong. Sometimes you just need to do what you're going to do and accept the fallout and wait for the intensity of their anger and their reaction to pass. This isn't your only option. Another option is to comply with their wishes and go along with what they want for your own peace. Now, this isn't about placating them or tiptoeing around them. It isn't hoping that things are going to be different, that one day you can earn their love and that this relationship will be transformed. This is a conscious choice made from self-awareness for your own sake, not for theirs. Compliance should never be the default mode across all of your relationships, and it comes at a terrible cost to you. However, there may be occasions in which you weigh up that the cost of complying and going along with someone isn't as great as the emotional toll of standing up to them and holding your boundary. And if you do that, I'd also suggest that you employ the next strategy I'm going to talk about, which is to create distance. This might mean limiting the amount of time you spend with them, or creating more emotional distance, deciding not to share personal or vulnerable information with them if you don't feel like you can really trust them emotionally. As well as creating some space from them, which is good for your own sanity, this also creates space in which you can focus on other relationships which are much more reciprocal. And the final option, which is usually the internet's preferred option, is to walk away. Sometimes accepting that a relationship is dangerous to you, that you're being abused in this relationship, or that it is completely unsalvageable, is the best thing to do for you. This decision is also not without cost. You may lose a relationship that at one time was very special to you. And as well as heartbreak, there may be serious repercussions in all areas of your life. It may affect your wider social circle, your family, your children, where you live, even your financial situation. When you do these things intentionally, when you withdraw from conflict, when you choose to go along with someone for the sake of your own peace, when you create distance between you and them, you're no longer fighting. You're not trying to get them to understand your point of view. You're no longer striving to get them to appreciate you, value you, or love you. You're accepting that this relationship is what it is, not what you hoped it would be. You'll reduce the conflict and flashpoints in this relationship, but you probably won't improve the quality of the relationship. So be ready, because accepting that this relationship is what it is and not what you hoped it would be can often come with a crushing sense of sadness, loss, and grief. And this sense of grief can often be the strongest and the most complicated when the person stays in your life. Maybe it's a close family member, a parent, or an ex-partner with whom you now co-parent. Every time you see them can be a crushing reminder that the relationship you had so much hope for isn't what you want or need it to be. So please go easy on yourself. And this acceptance and grief can also open up the space to focus on other relationships which are much more healthy. In these relationships, there is room for how you truly feel and for your limits and boundaries. This can be a real challenge if most of your relationships have been with people who don't respect your boundaries. If that's you, then learning the art of saying no and holding your boundaries in healthy relationships isn't just necessary to preserve your sanity, it's the very heart of building trusting, reciprocal, vulnerable relationships, which I will explore in depth in this video right here.